couple of things that are kind of happening in the news, and pensions is one, and the EDC and 38 Studios is the other. So we're going to kind of lead off with a couple of questions about those areas, and then we'll go into a little more philosophical things about, you know, what the position of the unions is in relationship to the Rhode Island economy. And to tell you the truth, how much of this is actually going to get into the newspaper, we don't really know. You know, we're going to sit down with the two of us.
I'm not guaranteed 2 full pages?
No.
No.
I would say you can be guaranteed not to get 2 full pages.
Okay. All right, good.
Given that we have 13 of them,
people.
Yeah.
if we, so they're probably all going to run to between 15 and 20 paragraphs.
Okay.
So
Right. But, you know, that doesn't mean that stuff that you tell us couldn't end up somewhere else.
Right.
And if you say something in this interview that we find highly newsworthy, you know, we will put it in tomorrow's paper.
Okay.
Let's see.
So if you tell us that there's been a negotiated settlement in the pension lawsuit,
That's right.
I'm leaving the room right away.
Okay. So all right. So we'll keep that one under.
And we'll lead with that. Now, my understanding is you were one of the labor leaders who talked to Link Chafee about the possibility of a negotiated settlement?
Yes.
Okay.
Actually, this issue or the idea of seeing if there's a way to come to an agreement outside of the court is something that has been talked about, you know, previous to that meeting.
Right.
And I don't really think that it was extremely newsworthy from the perspective that it's often the case that when parties are involved in a lawsuit that there's discussions or potential discussions to try to settle the issue.
Right.
So, you know, I think that what happened is the judge, Judge Taft Carter, in the previous case, which was brought for the 2009 and 10 changes, when she ruled that she believed that there was an implicit contract, at least created an atmosphere where, you know, I think the governor said, well, there could be a possibility that the state could lose. That could have some potential devastating circumstances attached to it. So why not see if we can get people to sit down and see if you can reach a settlement? Now, I mean, so it really was not anything to do with any specific issues, parameters of what would be discussed. It was more, do you think that it would be possible to, you know, see if we could reach an agreement?
That was sort of, you're leading into my next question, which was, can you give us any details of your conversation with Chafee at that time?
No, because there really weren't any details.
Right, okay.
Yeah, I mean, it was really more along the lines of, do you think that it would be possible to sit down? Obviously, it's a little complicated in that there's 2 parties to the lawsuit, both the treasurer's office and the governor's office, and really the way to get a settlement would require not just the governor but potentially the General Assembly to be involved, and they're not a party to the lawsuit.
right.
So, you know, it's not simple, and you know there would have to be an atmosphere where that could happen, and that parties would be willing to do it.
In principle, would you rather see an out-of-court settlement?
Well, I think, you know, traditionally, it's always better to have some control over your own destiny. So, you know, it would require the right framework and the right deal. But I think it's always better to at least know what you have as opposed to leaving it up to a decision that could go all or nothing.
Right. Okay. What sort of concessions, and I don't know if, you know, how far you've gone down this road, but what kind of concessions would the unions be willing to, and when I say unions, George, I mean the AFL-CIO.
Well, I think that's...
What sort of concessions are you guys?
Well, that we're not at that point yet. We're not at that point yet. You have about maybe 10 or 11 different unions that are involved in representing state employees or teachers and people in the MERS system. So it's not just it also involves municipal employees and firefighters and police, because they were also part of the change. So, you know, those groups would have to get together and make that decision. I think sometimes probably helpful to just as a disclosure, the AFL-CIO itself is really not a union. It's a federation of unions, and so each one of these unions is independent and autonomous.
Right.
So, you know, there is no, you get to a consensus by the different groups reaching that consensus.
Right.
So that's, we're not there yet.
Right, okay. How much responsibility, George, do you feel the unions have for the pension problem, for saddling the state with what a lot of people say is an unsustainable system?
You know, to be fair, very little.
Oh, okay.
Okay? And the reason I say that is that the pension system was created over a long period of time, and changes were made over a long period of time. And through the whole system, and people tend to forget this, particularly when we compare it to the public versus private debate. The state employees and the teachers have made their contribution every 2 weeks.
Right.
You know, so whether it was in the teachers' case, it was 9.5, and the state employees, it's 8 3/4.
Right.
The benefits that were changed over the years, looking back on it, the people in charge, the legislative leaders and the governors and the treasurers during those eras, during that time, I think failed the state by not doing their due diligence, by not doing the actuarial assumptions that should have been done. Perhaps it was irresponsible to increase some of the benefits without having done the actuarial analysis, which wasn't done.
So
But it takes two to tango, George.
Yes.
I mean, you guys were there asking for those benefits.
Oh no, absolutely right.
You could have turned them down.
Huh?
You could have turned them down.
Well, no, because again, this is different. This wasn't through the collective bargaining process. And remember, it's the benefits accrue to all the state employees, whether they're union or non-union.
Right.
So, people, people may have asked for that, but again, at some point, it was achieved through a statutory change, and the people who on the other side, whether that be the legislative leaders of the time, the governor at the time, or the treasurer at the time, should have done a better job of doing due diligence.
So, I don't want to get too far off on this tangent, but there are union members and have been union members in the General Assembly for
Correct.
decades.
Yep.
So, are you saying that those, and some of them have been legislative leaders, so you're saying that that some of those, your union members, failed in their own duty to make sure that the pension system was constructed properly. They're not just union. If they're a union member and they're part of the General Assembly, they're on both sides of that equation.
Well, in some cases, that's accurate. However, again, probably the person who has the most responsibility historically of doing that would have been the treasurer's office and the governor's office to do the analysis and to get the information out.
That's true.
So, I mean, go back to a couple of. I mean, the COLAs evolved over a long period, going back to Phil Noel.
Right.
The change in age happened in the 70s, and at the time, people thought it was affordable when they made that decision. But they didn't, I don't think they did the proper analysis at that time. But, from the perspective of where we are today, we do have to look at the big picture. We understood in 2011, when this pension change took place, that changes had to be made. There were changes made in 2005. There were changes made in 2009. There were changes made in 2010. And in each of those situations, people had been told or felt that, okay, we're losing. I mean, there weren't any changes for the good for the worker.
Right.
They were all takeaways from that perspective. And so then to come back in 2011 again and say, all right, look, sorry, we didn't do enough in 2005 and 2009 and 2010. In fact, going back to 1995, when the General Assembly increased the pension contribution for the employees by 1% with no benefit increases, no benefit changes, people were told, there was speeches made on the House floor at that time, that in 1995, by raising this, we'll solve the pension problem forever. That you'll never have to raise it again.
It's because people didn't do math.
Huh?
People didn't do
Well,
math.
I mean, that may, I don't know what they were basing, but those were the comments that were made. So,
Right.
but, so we have, as a labor community, we have to look at this in a balanced perspective. We are union members, some who are part of the pension system. We're also taxpayers. We're also a labor movement and has constituencies that are concerned about the other issues in our economy. For example, infrastructure spending and improving higher education and developmentally disabled funding and educational. So we don't come, the labor movement doesn't come to, the government from a narrow perspective. So there has to be a balance. And at this stage of the game, I think it's fair to say that the parties from the labor perspective felt that this change went too far. And were some changes necessary? The answer is yes. What that is right now is still unfolding.
Right. Suppose, George, you win the court challenge. Suppose you get everything you want.
Yep.
Now, Gina Raimondo and the chamber and a lot of other people say, well, throw the state into chaos and destroy our reputation in the financial community. What would the union be willing to do, assuming you're dealing from this position of strength? Would the union be willing to renegotiate at that point?
I don't know. That's too speculative.
Ha. All right. Worth asking. Okay. Paul, anything else on the pension? This, we don't want to get too narrow.
Yeah.
No,
this
no,
is not a story about the pensions.
Yeah.
Good.
No, I think that's
But,
yeah, we
okay.
can move on.
The EDC.
Yes.
Now, you're one of the few remaining EDC board members left who, goes back to the 38 Studios era. And if I'm not mistaken, now you're still on the board, correct?
I'm still on the board.
Right.
Yes.
Yeah, you did.
I'm like a bad penny. They can't get rid of me.
I believe you were the only one on the board who voted yes.
On the present board.
On the present board.
On the present board.
Right.
Yes.
The only
Yes.
remaining member.
The
Only remaining member.
That's
right?
correct.
Okay. First, why did you vote in favor of the 38 Studios deal?
Why did I felt that with the and this is very important, with the information that we had before us at the time, and that we based our decision on, I felt that this was an opportunity for Rhode Island to make a statement, be part of building a new industry, a new industry cluster, so to speak.
Right.
And that there were a couple of factors that that I relied on. One is that I relied on the judgment of the other business leaders that were on the board, who I felt were pretty competent individuals, still do. I thought that the people that that Charlene, or the company was associated with, were pretty high quality people. He had an arrangement with EA, Electronic Arts. Some of the Star Wars people were. I mean, so I think there's a misconception. This was really not a startup business. It was a business that was moving from Massachusetts. You already had something in play.
Right.
So and I think, quite honestly, if you're 2 or 3 touchdowns down in the fourth quarter, once in a while you have to throw a long pass.
Okay, good.
And if you're a state with 3 or 4% unemployment, you keep the ball on the ground.
Right.
So, it seemed like we obviously we knew it was risky, but we felt that it was something that could work.
Right. Now, have you, since that vote, have you taken any grief from your union colleagues, your members?
I took some grief before the vote. Again, but I think people generally felt that at the time it was an okay vote.
Right. Okay. Now the lawsuit that's currently been filed by Governor Chafee and the EDC
Right.
alleges that the EDC board, that would be you, was deliberately denied information, not only by 38 studio executives, but by the EDC's own staff and the EDC's own attorneys. Do you think that's true? Do you buy that narrative? You were there. You were on the board.
I have to be careful about this because it's a pending lawsuit.
Right.
But let me just say that I have read the complaint on several occasions.
I've read it too. It makes for fascinating.
It is almost
story.
a little
novel.
business. It feels like I'm reading John Grisham's The Firm.
It presumes facts, not evidence. Let's put it that way.
Well, yeah, but let's just say that I'll stand by the complaint. I think that I can, obviously feel that as a board member, I don't disagree with what was said in that complaint, and do feel that we were not provided with the information that I think, based on what has come out since that time, would have, I think, clearly would have been a different vote.
Okay. That kind of gets to my next questions. Do you think that's true? Did you vote in favor of proceeding with that lawsuit?
No comment.
Okay.
Only because those minutes have not been made
Right.
public, so
Right.
you can.
As a member of the board, and you kind of touched on this, did you feel, or do you feel now, in retrospect, deceived or duped or fooled?
Well, again, keeping it within the confines of the complaint, I think what is outlined there is that we were not provided with critical and necessary information to make a decision.
And if you had, do you feel the vote would have been different?
Based on what we know now, what I know now, yes.
Right, well, based on what we know now.
Yeah, absolutely.
Have you been, I guess the legal term would be deposed in the lawsuit, in that particular lawsuit?
Probably better not to comment.
What do you think should happen with the EDC? Do you think the moves Governor Chafee made are sufficient to reform the EDC?
Actually, I might be in a minority opinion at the moment,
right.
but I actually think EDC was going in a positive direction. Hit obviously a snag for a while because of everything related to EDC, but is actually I think the structure would work. Continues to work. I'm not a big fan at all of the RIPEC report.
That's the next question I had.
I think it is a Rube Goldberg chart,
Okay.
which would make him proud, but no one else would ever understand it.
Well, it's interesting you should say that because we sat and tried to figure out that chart
Yeah.
at one point. We had a little trouble ourselves.
Yeah, it's a confusing concoction of ideas, and actually, I think this is not that difficult to figure out. The Commerce Secretary concept to me is a waste of time. I think that there should be a point person, a person who does nothing but think about economic development, and that should be the EDC director. I think that is a cabinet member position.
So you think that Keith Stokes was the wrong person?
No, I'm talking about more the structure at the moment. I'm talking as opposed to the personality, because we'll maybe get to that in a second. But I think that you've got. We went through, and I was a part of the commission that Al Varechia chaired that reviewed EDC,
The basket of frogs commission.
but it was actually I think it was a very very good exercise, and it resulted in. Some significant changes in direction at EDC. Since that time, they've done a much better job of going out into the business community with the Chamber of Commerce, doing much more work with local economic development organizations from cities and towns. They developed an urban agenda. Cheryl Sneed did a superb job putting together a continuum of capital analysis and structure of what was available in Rhode Island for capital at different stages of development, and that's been worked. The job guarantee, you remember there was two funds. One is the job guarantee fund, which is the one that was created 38 Studios, and then the other one was URBA, which ironically enough was the seed money for CVS and GTEC.
Right.
So when the legislature refunded URBA, and then also created the Job Guarantee Fund, they were really set aside to do two separate things. One was sort of the old style business, with bricks, and the other was to be sort of like the businesses of the new kind of businesses that didn't have bricks and mortar, so to speak.
That was the Job Development Fund.
And that was the Job Guarantee Fund.
Right.
Now, since the 38 Studios thing, we have reevaluated the criteria for those funds so that not the huge amount of money can be put into any one project.
Right.
And we've done a couple of deals since that time. The new label thing, the truck company. I found that one fascinating. I forget the name of the company. The one that has the solar panels on the trucks, and that they, so there's been 5 or 6 things that have come there. The energy renewal. Money has been spent when Julian Dash was there. He left. So I think there's a lot of things. I think we're the biggest failure of EDC, or the biggest, and this gets into what kind of things we should do. We are our own worst enemy, the state of Rhode Island. If the state of Rhode Island was a politician, you'd lose every single election, because you always let the opponent define you, and you never define yourself. And what I mean by that is. There are probably in a given year 30 or 40 or 50 different studies that come out that rate Rode Island and rank Rhode Island.
We always are 48.
Well, no, but we're not.
Right.
There was the CNBC. 50. So everybody in Rhode Island, all the leaders of Rhode Island go around, and all the politicians go around for the next year and say we're number 50. Well, that's even if you were running a football team, you'd be fired. You don't go in and tell the team every day you're the worst team that ever played, or you're the terrible players. You don't have to be myopic about it, but you should at least be trying to promote the positive. So, there was another, and I forget, there was a study that came out last week. It was in the Journal had it, the Providence Business News had it. Rhode Island was in the middle of the pack.
23rd.
23rd. But
I wrote that story.
Is anyone running around talking about that one? No. We're talking about the one that says we're number 50. So I've said this at a couple of these forums. In fact, I said at the last EDC board meeting too that we should devote some resources to telling our story in the right places strategically about what we have that is a positive. What are the positive things that we have, and at least get rid of some of the myths that are created. The tax issue. We're about the middle of the pack, except when you get to the property tax.
Right.
And then all of a sudden we go up quite a bit because the property tax is so bad. Income tax, middle of the pack. Sales tax, once you adjust for what isn't taxed and what is, middle of the pack. Corporate taxes aren't that high. They're high in New England, but overall, in terms of when you do the studies of per thousand or per hundred, whatever they do. But we should just, my dream idea is to have the media. The media. Once a month.
Here we are.
Once every 2 weeks. Put in a good news page in the journal. I mean, these are the good things that are happening in the state of Rhode Island, whether it's a small business story, but these are the good things that are happening. Or Channel 10, do a little I mean, they do it on the national news every, I watch the NBC. End of everything, they have a little, these are some of the positive things that are happening.
Right.
I mean, some of those are more, human interest story, but we got a lot of good things we actually have a lot of good things happening, but we don't promote it.
Right.
We're our own worst enemy. So.
Well, you're not the first. I mean, I went to that Make It Happen thing at the Rhode Island Foundation, and there were plenty of people there who were saying the same thing. You're not the first to come.
No, but I think that was a very significant event. I was shocked that I was heartened actually, not shocked. I was actually heartened that many people, representing a whole range of spectrums of philosophy and political viewpoints, etc., were willing to come together for something that had no idea what was going to be. But more importantly, come back the next day. They had more people come back the next day. So there's something out there that people really want to make this a better state. And, I think I went to a couple of chamber events over the years, and I used to always say, we probably agree on 90% of the things, but we spend 90% of our time fighting on the 10%, 10% on the 90%. So maybe if we just switch things around a little bit, we could make a little progress.
Right.
Because that was encouraging.
I guess the question that everyone has to look at is, okay, what's going to come out of it?
And
something concrete, something that really changes the situation in here.
Right.
Because despite all the good things you're talking about, our unemployment rate is still second highest in the
country.
No, it is.
No, and I'm not. We shouldn't dismiss what's happening, the negative things, but we should focus on the things that have worked in the past. I would argue that historically, this state has worked the best when business, labor, and government have worked together. And there's a lot of examples, including the building across the street.
Right.
The two buildings across the street, and the airport, and the mall, and workers' compensation reform, which was done in 1990 and is never brought up as a problem anymore. And there's a reason for that, because the business, labor, and government have continued to work on that under the auspices of the Workers' Comp Advisory Council since 1990. And we meet every year. We meet 4 or 5 times a year, and we keep an eye on the workers' comp system, and we continue to make changes to make sure that it never goes back to where it was before.
Right. George, on a bit of a sort of a larger front, a lot of people in the business community will say that unions put Rhode Island at a competitive disadvantage, that they raise the cost of doing business, they make it more difficult to compete, and that the more highly unionized the state is, the more hostile it is to business. As a union leader, how do you answer that? And I guess the flip side of that is that how can unions help Rhode Island?
Well, I think I would obviously disagree with that statement.
We're not surprised.
And I think that, again, what I had said before, there's probably more business-labor cooperation than people are aware of. And, we had the examples that I mentioned. But, for example, the building trades. There is an organization called Build Rhode Island where the major construction companies work on a regular basis with the unions. The apprenticeship system is based on business-labor cooperation, based on developing a well-skilled, trained, educated workforce, which translates into higher productivity, lower workers' compensation rates, lower absenteeism, better quality of work, and you'll find the employers that will come up to the General Assembly and offer that testimony. I think again, I don't know what people mean by that. I mean, do they want a workforce where the workforce has no voice on the job, where the workforce is low paid, where the workforce is low skilled and doesn't have benefits? What kind of a society we're going to have? The one thing that the labor community has done, and I would argue still does, is creates a middle class. And if more wealth were distributed to the working class and the middle class, I think we would have a better economy because we'd have more purchasing power. Because these are the same people that want the worker that's working for them to make nothing, but they still want that worker to have money in the pocket so they can buy their product. Other workers to have money in their pocket so they can buy their product. So you can't have it both ways. We're either going to have a role and we have to fight for every day to maintain this role because no one gave this to us. I mean, we had to fight to gain the right to organize and the right to have a voice on the job. And it's more than just wages. It's your standard of living. It's your benefit structure. It's your ability to have a voice on the job and to be protected. Those are all positive things to an economy, not negative things.
Okay.
So, is the AFL-CIO prepared to essentially to put its money where its mouth is?
Yep.
You ticked off that building.
Yep.
Why don't you guys invest in a project in Rhode Island? One of the things that we're going to be talking about is the URI nursing school. It's a project in need of a sponsor.
Yeah.
Dooley has come out and said he thinks that the way to go forward is to have a private
public-private partnerships. Yeah.
So why doesn't the AFL-CIO?
Well, couple reasons. Well, I mean that could happen. If you're talking about the AFL-CIO, what you probably mean is pension funds.
Right.
Okay.
Right. So directing your pension
right,
money
and in
investments.
fact, that does happen. We have an organization called the Housing and Investment Trust. There's also ULICO, which is run by the unions, which is
Yes, and which has McElroy's on the...
And McElroy was the chairman of the CEO.
Yeah, so I would think that you would have a direct pipeline.
Well, let me give you a couple of examples. The original GTEC building in West Greenwich was partially funded by the AFL-CIO Housing Investment Trust. The Intercontinental, I shouldn't say what I think of it, struck architecturally. The condos over there in Water Place Park.
Yeah.
Oh, okay, so the tall ones.
Yeah.
Okay.
A lot of the money for that came out of union pension funds. So if you look across the country, we haven't done as much in Rhode Island, and I'd like us to do more. Well, part of it is because in some cases it's a two-way street. In a lot of those states where that's happened, the funds from the state of Rhode Island and other cities and towns have been invested in AFL-CIO Housing Investment Trust, and then you get an opportunity to bring the money back into the state.
So have you had that? Well, so it's a two-part.
Yeah,
Maybe you know.
Yeah. Well, we had approached both Treasurer Caprio and Treasurer Raimondo about that possibility.
And when was it that? When did you approach Raimondo?
There have been some discussions ongoing on that, so it's being looked at.
What specifically are the discussions ongoing?
Well, in some cases, the AFL-CIO Housing Investment Trust gets money from other union pension funds, but also cities and towns states and cities have made investments, and they're pretty, again, they have to do their due diligence to make sure that they fit into their profile.
Okay, so what's the possibility, we'll cut to the chase, what's the possibility that you will be standing shoulder to shoulder with Gina Raimondo's in 2013 saying the state and the Union Trust Fund are joining together to invest in the URI nursing building or any other building?
I'm not. The problem with some of those. Well, actually, that could be a possible investment. They do shy away from new companies because you get into that kind of things. But in places where like that, where it would be a public-private partnership, where there would be a revenue stream to
right,
yes,
exactly.
Yeah,
you've got essentially a hybrid university that's private and public money,
right,
investing its lease money in a building that's going to put your people to work.
Yeah.
And return on investment.
And return on investment.
So
I mean, something like that could happen. I mean, I don't know if that would be a project that they'd be interested in. They've done some other stuff in. Like housing, but whether or not they would get.
So who would you need to talk to get that done?
That would goes above my. That happens at there's an AFL, so Housing and Investment Trust organization that would make that decision whether or not.
That's a national.
That's a national organization.
Could you go to them?
So could you go to them and say we have an idea?
Oh, absolutely. Oh, yeah.
Okay,
No, and the unions that have invested in them could also go to them and say, listen, this is a project. Could you take a look at it? Sure.
Okay. And what about going to Ulico and talking to McElroy about?
He's no longer there, but.
Oh, I thought you still. I know he was an emeritus. I'm sorry.
Right. Yeah. But no, I mean those kind of conversations have gone on in the past. Absolutely.
So
but we haven't come to fruition yet.
Okay. So could you make it come to fruition?
Well, if it's under the right circumstances, it could happen. Yes.
All right. There's a lot of talk, about meds and eds, and we're entering this post-manufacturing innovation knowledge economy, call it whatever you want.
Right.
Which is there a place for unions in that kind of economy? And
absolutely.
Where do you see that?
Well, first of all, one of the most highly unionized industries in Rhode Island is the healthcare industry. Mm-hmm. In terms, actually, it's interesting. Probably both the educational, I don't know if we call it industry, whether it's the colleges and universities, and the hospitals are among the more highly unionized industries in the state. So, is there a place for the labor movement there? Absolutely. Mm-hmm. I mean, we have. And again, represent people from the lower skilled workers to the nurses and other professionals that work there. So if that area is to grow, and I think it's got some potential to grow, that would be very beneficial for the labor movement.
Do any of your apprenticeship programs, the ones that are in place now, focus on medical health?
Yes.
Related
in
jobs?
fact, probably one of the most successful job training programs, and it's not, I don't know if you call it an apprenticeship, it's not really set up as an apprenticeship, but is called Stepping Up, which is a very innovative program between UNAP, the United Nurses and Allied Professionals.
I know about Stepping Up.
You know about Stepping Up.
Right.
I mean, that to me is where we're going. That's a model because it deals with two issues from our perspective and from the employer perspective. One is it takes existing workers that are already in that company, that they already have, they know that they show up, they have a good track record, and we set up a mechanism for them to move up into the higher skilled jobs, which we know, looking out demographically, are going to need replacements. The only reason that we haven't had as much of a nursing crisis is because the economy got so bad after 2008 that people they kept working instead of retiring.
Right.
So nurses stayed longer, which has got us through the. But if you still look out from the demographics, that's going to be an occupation that's going to need a lot of people coming in. So you take nurses' aides and other people, you train it, and then you fill, as they move up, you take people from the community. So there's a connection with Dorcas Place and Genesis and the Institute for Labor Studies. So it's a combination program now with the Providence Health, with the SEIU, UNAP, and the Teamsters, along with Women and Infants and Lifespan. In addition to that, we've just set up we're trying to set up a very interesting or innovative program where we're going to try to take the community college to the workplace. We have been running classes in medical technology and medical coding,
Right.
which is now more and more required with the healthcare law that passed, at Providence Health Centers. And this was a joint program between the Providence Health Centers, CCRI, and the Institute for Labor Studies and Research. What was interesting is the classes were held at the workplace after work. The union negotiated with the employer to pay for part of the cost of the program and provided the space and some time.
So that's the Providence Health Center?
Providence Health Center is over on Allen's Avenue.
Right, and you, and the union?
And the SEIU. SEIU 1199.
And CCRI?
And CCRI and the Institute for Labor Studies and Research was the coordinator. Now, it was about, the interesting concept there is that we're very much aware that as this economy changes, you're obviously going to have to increase your skills, upgrade your skills, have skills, whatever, even if you're working. But it's very difficult for people that are working sometimes to take those classes. Sometimes, the class that you have to take is at 3 o'clock in the afternoon and you work till 4.
Right.
Or sometimes it's at night and you have other responsibilities. So what we're doing, and we've done this in another area, we're bringing the classroom to the workplace and making, and also there's a sort of, it's hard to explain, but an individual's maybe hasn't been in a classroom or hasn't been in a school environment for years. It's hard for them sometimes to go back into that and be the oldest person in the room sometimes.
Right.
Now they're taking it with their colleagues. We've been doing this at the Plumbers and Pipefitters Hall over in East Providence. Classes on Friday nights run by CCRI instructors that come to the Union Hall and upgrading the skills and educational opportunities for some of these guys who they're in the apprenticeship program. They may have got their associate degree. They want to get a college degree, and they want to take construction management classes.
Right.
So we're providing that. So our thinking going forward is we have to expand the opportunities for people to obtain skill upgrading and learning opportunities.
So are you concerned they might expand right out of the union?
Well, you know what? In some cases, in the building trades thing, sometimes they can become. They want to set. Some of these people would really like to set up their own businesses, and it could be a union business. Remember, we don't work unless there's companies.
Right.
So. If someone has been a union member for 20 years and they set up their own company and then they sign an agreement with the union, then you now have a new union company in town. We build our own union.
Right. What areas besides healthcare? Now, obviously, I've seen the stats. I'm sure you have too. That union membership is declining across the country.
Yep.
As a percentage of the total workforce. Besides the things you mentioned, what areas in the Rhode Island economy do you see as sort of ripe for organizing?
Well, I think that the tourism industry.
Okay.
We've had some success with hotel. I think there's some opportunities to organize in the we'll call it the hospitality industry,
right.
But more specifically the hotels. They still many of the hotels are not organized. So that's certainly, there's still more opportunities in the healthcare field, nursing homes, home health aides. This whole, as we've sort of moved the healthcare system out into the community, you have a lot of these nonprofits and companies that are working. those are probably there's still more opportunities in the construction field, but
Right.
things have been a little slow in that
Right.
area right now.
So if someone, I don't know, waiters, waitresses, they're hard
Yeah.
to organize though, because they're part-time, they're living on tips.
It is very hard. And I think the problem that we've had is that as the manufacturing has gone down, although it's very interesting because I think it was part of your articles that actually the amount of value of the manufacturing hasn't decreased all that much. It's the number of people
Right.
that are working are producing more because of the technological advances.
Right.
As an aside, I mentioned this to Andy. We did a tour. I'm on the governor's workforce board, and we did a little tour, about 3-hour tour of Keiko. That's a fascinating place to see. I'm sure you've both been there.
Yeah.
But I mean, and you see every single person has a computer at their workstation. I mean, 20 years ago that would have been. 15 years ago, that would have been like Dick Tracy watch, to think of it in those terms, and yet but what's happened is as that industry has stabilized or gone down, probably not as much. We've had continual growth in what we would call, I don't know, the fast food industry, the
Right.
service industry,
Right.
the retail industry. Very, very difficult to organize. Built-in obstacles. The employers, in many cases, set up the work schedules so that they don't want full-time workers. They set up part-time work shifts to avoid having to deal with benefits, health insurance, etc., because it is so expensive. And you're right. The attachment to the workforce, or either to that type of work or that company, is less than it is when you go to a job that you feel you're going to be there for not the rest of your life as it used to be, but for a good period of time.
Or you might only be there for 4 months.
Right.
Oh, right, exactly.
Summer job.
Yeah, I mean, when I was organizing, even in the nursing home industry, when I started a few years ago, and the hair was brown and everything, nursing homes were hard to organize because of the turnover. You had to catch that moment where the anger, there was an anger going on, and a leader. You had to have the right leader, and it had to happen in that time period, or else if you waited it out for 3 or 4 months or 6 months, that opportunity just disappeared.
This sort of leads to that. A lot of those workers are minority workers.
Yes.
Does the composition of the unions within the AFL-CIO, does that match the sort of changing complexion of the Rhode Island population?
I would say at the moment, probably not, but it's moving in that direction. For example, if you went and visited the apprenticeship programs of the building trades, which in the past may have had a reputation for not being very open to minorities. That's completely different now. You go to the painters union, the IBEW, the laborers, even the what we call the licensed trades. There has been
So what percentage of your membership in Rhode Island is minority?
I don't know the answer to that. You'd have to. I don't know if there's a way to get that information, to be honest. Unless you did a survey, like a poll type thing. If.
Have you guys missed an opportunity by not doing it sooner?
Oh, I think so. Yes, yes, I do. I think we were, and most of the unions that are now are committed to organizing among the low wage workforce. For example, the SEIU, Unite Here. The laborers, when I first started organizing in Rhode Island in the early 70s, I was considered to be radical because I was organizing minority workers, and a lot of unions at that point. The labor movement came out of the war, 50s, 60s, 70s. Things were like, hey, everything's cool.
Right.
We're doing, and then they didn't want to change that much. Now you've got this massive campaign that the SEIU put on across the country that came into Rhode Island, Justice for Janitors.
Right.
You know, the janitorial things, which
Right.
just achieved a very good contract with, you know. So we've changed our focus and our tactics. Before they would organize maybe one company at a time. Now you, as they just did this in New England, which Rhode Island was the beneficiary of. It, you know, that was a pretty good contract. I mean, it wasn't one where you were losing ground; you were actually gaining ground. So there are still opportunities to organize in the janitorial field. That type of, and the advantage of that, unless we're not seeing something down the road, is those jobs are going to stay here. I don't think they're exportable. Like restaurants,
Right.
They're not exportable. Janitors, people that work at educational institutions or hospital. I mean, some of the healthcare stuff, the X-ray stuff, you seem to be able to transfer
Right, because
that.
it's digital. You
Yeah.
can't digitize.
Yeah, but you still need people to clean the rooms and provide the food and take care of the people at the bedside and do the operation. So there's at least more stability in the workforce. So I think that's one of the things we're looking at now too. Is
So you see an opportunity within the service sector as opposed
Yes.
to, say, the manufacturing?
well, no, I
sector?
think there's still opportunities in the manufacturing sector. Though unfortunately the industries that we did have heavy representation in have gone.
Right.
You know, whether it was the wire and cable industry, whether it was, I mean, look at some of the giants that are no longer here. Those were just forces that they were above the pay grade of the Rhode Island AFL-CIO because they deal primarily with federal tax and
Right.
trade policy and monetary policy.
Okay. Let me ask you a little bit about, there's a lot of talk, and there always seems to be, about regulatory reform.
Yep.
You know, too much regulation. What are a few, let's say, of the top regulatory reforms in Rhode Island that the AFL-CIO would like to see happen?
Well, I would say there's got to be sort of like a one-stop. I've served on the EDC. I've listened to
Right.
this concern. I take a lot of I get a lot of good information from my buddy Carl Wadenstein from
Carl's-
VIPCO, who is a character of characters,
He is
to
a
say the
character-
least.
He is a character of characters.
And I think that from a concept point of view, the labor movement would stand with the business community and say, listen, you've got to figure out a way to give a specific timetable to businesses as to when they're just giving them a decision so that they can go forward. There should be a one place where there would be where one person could provide you with the information as to which who you have to see, and at both the state and the local level.
So concierge service.
Yeah, I mean, so that some you can go one place and find out who you have to see, and get it, and there should be requirements that you get an answer within a certain specified period of time. I know this job across the street, the job next to right here, the Hasbro thing, that was held up for a long time because of fire. Now there may be legitimate things, but you can't take that long to do
Right.
it. You got to be able to give some. And so from the labor perspective, if companies are wanting to come in the state or expand, we want them to be able to do that as efficiently as possible. So we are not an impediment at all to responsible regulatory reform. And again, you have to, what people have to do, I think, and for all the talk about it, people have to start getting into the specific. What do you really mean? What should be a reasonable time to get an answer for someone? But I think that's an area that both business and labor could work together on.
Is there anything, you talked about getting the specifics, is there any specific things that the state should do right now that you, as a labor community, would support?
Well, I think, the issue was the subject of the EDC started to take
Right.
up that issue,
Right.
and then they moved Leslie over to the Department of Administration.
Right.
So I think at least conceptually, giving that office some status was a positive thing. And I don't know, to be honest, the specifics as to what other things needed that they've identified that need to be done. I'd have to follow up on that a little bit more.
Okay. Turning to the General Assembly,
Are they coming back this year?
a few there, yes, they are.
Right after the pension
Right, that's right.
decision.
Um,
The negotiated settlement.
That's right. What are, let's say, the top 3 priorities for you, besides pensions,
Yeah.
We'll put that aside.
Right.
Top 3 things, I sound like David Letterman.
Okay, you got
Top-
3.
Top 3 things, or top 2 things, you give me a number, that you would like to see the General Assembly take up to specifically to help the Rhode Island economy
Okay.
in the next session.
Well, I can give you a couple things.
All right.
One is
Yes.
we should invest state dollars, general revenue dollars, in job training, workforce development. I think that's something that everyone says is their top priority. And if something is going to be a priority, then you have to make it a priority. And the way you make it a priority is to say, okay, what are we going to...
You mean more than the state is already?
The state's doing nothing.
The state's doing nothing.
Nothing.
So Charlie Fogarty's
No.
DLT.
No, actually, I know this tale.
He knows his tale. The state of Rhode Island, general revenue dollars are doing little to nothing. I used to say nothing. Now I have to correct myself
Right.
because if you read the biannual plan, you can
Right.
get the numbers. We fund job training and workforce development primarily through 2 areas. One is federal. The federal VIA funds that come into the department and then are distributed to the 2 workforce boards. And they are very formula-oriented and very specific as to who can be helped and what your eligibility is and all that kind of stuff. And so, it's very helpful. They do a good job, but those funds are contingent on what's happening at the federal level and have been declining and may, depending on whether we do a Thelma and Louise in a couple of weeks,
Right.
could be gone completely. So then we have the Job Development Fund, which was created under the Dupree administration with the full support of business and labor, which diverts money into the Job Development Fund. The state of Rhode Island insults the workforce development system by not only not funding anything out of general revenue, but they take $1.8 million off the top. So this money that the employers had paid, diverted legally out of the unemployment insurance fund, specifically for the purposes of job training, which was created initially to help incumbent workers, because the federal government at that time didn't allow incumbent workers to be trained. And that's why we created this as a new. It was historic when we did it. We were the second state that did it. We take 10% off the top, called the indirect cost recovery. So we take 1.2 million from the designated fund and give it back to the general revenue, and then we spend $850,000 collecting the 12 million through a memorandum of agreement between the DOA and the Department of Labor and Training.
Why does it cost $850,000?
If you could,
for
that could,
computer?
I think, who you have left in the investigative reporting department? That'd be a good one to find out, because nobody could
Steve,
figure.
who's there?
Nobody, nobody can figure that one out. So I would propose that we have the framework for an excellent workforce development system. It's evolved over the last couple of years. We have sort of just come through a number of different things to decide where money could be spent and how it could be spent. And I think that if the state were serious about this, and this is going to be one of the top AFL-CIO priorities, we're going to advocate for at least $5 million of general revenue to go into job training programs through the Governor's Workforce Board, the Human Resource Investment Council. Because that way you don't have to spend any money on creating any bureaucracy,
The bureaucracy's already there.
It's already there.
Right.
And it's,
Have you spoken to Mr. Fox, Ms. Piper?
yes, I have. I've spoken to all of them, and we're going to be advocating this, and we're looking for champions.
Okay.
And any and all are welcome.
And did either
Well, I have.
Mr. Fox or
They have.
Piper we agree
this-
to be the champions?
Not as of yet, but I hope they will. We're always optimistic.
I think the problem there, George, is everyone would like to see that, but they say, well, if we take $5 million and give it to workforce development, where's it going to come from?
Well,
It's got to come from
but
somewhere
those
else.
decisions have to be. I mean, listen, the governor last year. Now, the governor, to his credit, has now added workforce development to one of his 3 priorities.
Okay.
He is now saying we have education, infrastructure, and workforce development. And I've asked him at public forums and personally that if he's going to be sincere about that, then he has to put some money. Now, what did he do last year? He did 2 things. He accelerated the education formula, and the General Assembly concurred. He took money from the capital funds so that we didn't have to do a highway bond issue for the first time, which I think in the long term, if we go in that direction, will do a lot for our infrastructure. So my point is that if you say something's going to be a priority, you have to back it up with an action. And he did that in those cases. And then, I consider some of the bond issues that were passed to be improvements in our infrastructure. So, and having them on the ballot and stuff like that fulfills that. So that's going to be a top priority.
Okay.
We still need to address the issue of misclassification of employees. It's a growing problem.
What exactly? I'm not
What is
misclassification?
It's employers misclassifying their workers as independent contractors as opposed to employees, and it is rampant in not just Rhode Island but in other states. But we're worse than the other states because Connecticut and Mass have taken much stronger actions to deal with this issue. What it means is that you have a lot of, particularly in the construction, hospitality, janitorial. Well, for example, you go back to the stories you guys broke at the courthouse. Remember when the people for the independent, they had subcontracted the work to the private companies?
Right, the janitors.
They weren't treating them as employees.
So they don't have to give them health care, for example?
They don't pay workers' comp, they don't pay unemployment insurance, and they don't pay taxes. And so it's not just an injustice to the worker, it's an injustice to the good employer, because the good employer is now being undercut by the bad employer. We've been working on this. We got some legislation passed last year, but we still need a better definition of what is an employee. Believe it or not, these different definitions in different sections of the law.
So, presumably, if anybody's going to not be on the side of the angels on this, it's going to be the business community. Who in the business community have you called?
The business community, the good employers, I would say the responsible employers are in favor of this.
Can you give an example?
Build Rhode Island, it's rampant in the construction industry. So you have the mechanical trades, the trade associations of the builders have all been in favor of this right from the very beginning.
What about any of these janitorial companies, for instance?
No. I think there's some that play by the rules. The ones that have the union contracts, for example, that work at CVS and Fidelity and all Blue Cross, all the major corporations, they're all fine with it because they're paying the worker the right wage, they're paying unemployment, they're paying taxes. It's like what happened with the 2 or 3 companies here. Imagine in the courthouse, people are working in the courthouse illegally, and now they've cleaned that up a little bit since then. But we have to have a more comprehensive thing on that. They've done a much stronger job in Mass and Connecticut. You got to get the AG's office to start enforcing these violations of prevailing wage and wage an hour. We call it wage theft. It's interesting. If you go into a store and rob the store owner of $300, you're going to be in big trouble. You know, it's a felony. You're going to go to court. You're going to go to jail. If the employer robs you of $300 by cheating you on your wages, by not paying overtime, by not paying Sunday work, by paying you less than the minimum wage, we treat it like, oh, that's too bad. That has to change, and we need stricter enforcement of that. And we've been working on that both legislatively and with the AG's office and the Department of Labor. So that's an area of focus. We're going to be pushing for tax equity.
Tax equity.
Yes, we are. We're going to be pushing for continuation of the tax bill that we put in last year, which would create a higher rate for the people over $250,000. And we believe. We haven't. There's a number of things that could be done with that kind of money. It depends on what we haven't come up with a final bill yet, but.
So you would add another rate?
Would add another.
At the top end?
Right.
How much would that rate be?
We're still under discussion. Last year's bill that Maria Simonini put in was 9.9% for the income over $250,000.
So you're going to go back to start there and go up? Or?
No.
So what is it now? Is it 9.9?
No. Right now the rate's 5.9%.
No. That I know. I mean, what?
Okay. Yeah.
What do you want the rate to be? What will you propose?
The groups that are working on this haven't come up with a final figure yet, but let's put it this way. It'll be more than 5.9%.
Will it be in the neighborhood of 9.9?
Yeah, it won't be more than that.
Oh, okay.
It won't be more than that.
But it'll be.
But and then last year there's a whole range of issues that could be spent on, but a couple things that were being raised at that time were giving that money or take that money and give it to the cities and towns to reduce the property tax or to offset the property tax, or some groups wanted to spend it to restore some of the money for the developmentally disabled programs that were cut.
What about putting that money into workforce development?
Well, I mean, again, at the end of the day, the final arbiters of that decision, of that, if that were to pass,
right,
and it did had quite a bit of support last time, but
well, I think not to editorialize or interject, but I think in some ways that's one of where the pushback comes from the business community. It's not. Is about. You're going to raise the taxes and you're going to put it to a social program that I may or may not see the wisdom of. For somebody who's just a dollars and cents guy is going to say, "Where's the return for me?"
No, and ultimately that decision would be, if something like this were to get some momentum, I think the General Assembly would have to give that careful consideration of how to say, if you said to people in the business community, well, we're going to do that to offset property tax because you're also getting killed. Your property taxes may be hurting you more than the income tax.
Right.
And again, remember, this whole thing was predicated when we did it. The whole theory was this was going to create jobs.
Right.
And so, I'll be honest with you, the unemployment rate, we're 5 or 6% right now. I don't think that there'd be any capacity for this kind of an effort.
Do you think the argument that it takes more than a year to see the results
but they keep changing it every year so that you always have that argument.
It's always one more year.
So remember they had it at that rate, and then they changed it and got rid of the deductions. Mm-hmm. So I think that's been a strategy. We change it every couple of years, so we can argue that we have to leave it the same, even though we'll change it again. Yeah. Gets a little bit,
Okay.
Let's see, binding arbitration. But we're having a new phrase for this.
Okay.
Responsible contract resolution. Because you know what? I think it's a better way of describing what we're trying to do. Responsible contract resolution, because that's really what it is.
Now, a lot of people, the at Acorns of the world, let's say, think.
Can I ask you a question? What happened to him?
I don't know him.
No, I know. Have you noticed?
Other than the fact that he's thin?
No, 5 weeks in a row since the election, he hasn't written one columm
Oh.
about how stupid the Rhode Island electorate is, and he's writing about Lincoln a lot.
Maybe taking some time off.
No, he's had 5 columns, but I've been shocked.
Even now, I cover some towns. North Kingstown, South Kingstown, Narragansett, and
Yep.
the town councils hate the idea of buying.
Oh no, sure they do, because part of it is it's been. I don't think they really looked behind it. I mean, look, people don't want strikes,
Right.
okay, and people don't like what happened in East Providence. And, we always operate, we operated for a long time after the Warwick decision back in the 80s, where it was understood by parties that you continue under the terms of the old contract until you reach a new agreement.
Right.
And that worked. That was the modus operandi in these communities, not just for the teachers, but for the other contracts and for all that period of time. Now you have a scenario where in East Providence people say, okay, contract ends. We're going to implement our last offer. We're going to take away your benefits. We're going to cut your pay. We're going to change your health care benefits. We're going to do whatever we want to do. Unions can't strike. So how do you bargain in that situation if someone wants to take it to that extent? So you need something to fill the gap, to get, because you want to have a way to resolve the problem. And we think this is a responsible way to review it. I mean, we're not talking about. We were talking the last bill that people didn't really get to really read it because it was changing and evolving. This was 2 or 3 years ago, but we were talking about having judges do it. We're not talking about people think we don't control the arbitrators. I mean it's ridiculous. Both parties have to agree on an arbitrator. Usually go through the Federal Mediation and Conciliation Service or the AAA. You have neutral arbitrators who have been vetted, and they go through a process to get there, and people can refuse or not take certain ones. In this case, we had the judges going to be, so you got to just have a way to resolve a problem so it doesn't keep festering. You don't want to have the work to rule situations because people find that offensive. You don't want to have a strike. In the workers, you got to have some level bargaining field. I mean, at the end of the day, if we were in that situation, imagine if the union were in that situation. You come to the end of the contract, and the union you don't bargain. The union says, "Hey, we came to the end of the contract. The law says now I can now decide what we're going to do going forward unilaterally." How long would that last? Like minutes? Okay. So it really shouldn't work the other way either. So anyway, it'll be a subject of discussion.
I'm sure.
It probably won't happen right away, but the other issue that we're still think that could be helpful for economic development is restoration under different parameters of the historic tax preservation.
That was on the list. That was on the list, as a matter of fact.
Yeah.
Okay.
We have. I think we, as a labor community, look at it from a couple perspectives. One is that because it's a use of state tax dollars of expenditures, or giving a break to people,
Right.
It should be covered by the prevailing wage law, because it's no different than any other public project. And secondly, I think and we've worked with Grow Smart on this and some other groups of trying to tailor it a little bit more than it was before. We would support that effort, particularly giving more emphasis to two things that I think are critical. One is getting property that is presently not on the tax rolls onto the tax rolls, because then you have a major benefit in that for the city and town, because now you're adding property tax revenue to the city and town.
So can you give me an example of that? You're talking about a school?
No, I'll give you an example. The Hope Club.
Okay.
I mean, of what not to do. They used historic tax preservation to put the Hope Club, to fix up the Hope Club.
Right.
Well, they're already in that case, I don't know if they pay taxes. They probably
Right.
don't. But there's no benefit to the city or town by doing that. Whereas if you take an abandoned building and use historic tax money, and then that becomes even if it becomes an office building, then now you have a building that was not on the tax rolls,
Or at least at a minimum.
or maybe had been, or has increased the value of it. So
Right.
you might still be on the tax rolls as a piece of unused property, but the value now goes up, and so you do that. And secondly, there should be and again, again, the General Assembly has to work out the details of this, but you would think you'd want to also have, if you had limited funds, you would put in the criteria that there's going to be permanent job creation, not just a construction activity. And probably the best example of the use of the historic tax preservation is the Renaissance Hotel. Because then you took it off, you put it on the tax rolls, and you now have 150 or so people working there every day. So now you've got it. You have a payback stream for that. The worst examples of it were this couple of these condo developments. Rising Suns down in Olneyville, and Struver Brothers. I mean, Rising Suns. They were using we call them like irresponsible contractors. People weren't paying. They were using independent contractors. We weren't even getting back tax money for the people who were working. They were cheating. So you've got to have some enforcement mechanism built in.
So what's your concern that you're going to end up with another wave of really good empty buildings, in 5 years?
Well, I mean, I think that's where the learning from the past is helpful, right? To make sure that the thing has it has a business plan that makes sense. And I think, I don't know, I mean, there should be, I think that if I remember correctly, that was too much in the hands of the Preservation Society or the historic I think you have to have some real you have to have a role for EDC possibly in that, and a role for the communities if they have a local EDC board like in Providence. So you have several sets of eyes looking at the thing, not just someone looking at it aesthetically. Like, wouldn't it be nice if we could bring this building back?
Right.
It's more. This isn't aesthetic. This is about economic development.
Right.
Right.
So I'm going to ask one quick question to follow up. So do you think that any legislation or revival of that program should speak to how the tax credits are brokered? You essentially create a secondary market.
Yeah.
So there's money to be made in that market
because they sell it to other entities.
right,
Yeah.
which is fine.
Right.
But do you think that should be regulated in any way? Who gets to sell them? Who gets to buy them?
I don't know. I think that's worth looking at. Yeah. I don't know. I don't really know enough about how that really works to have an opinion at the moment.
Right. And would the money be capped with the amount of money that could go into that?
Well, I think that was one of the problems they had before. I think there has to be. All of a sudden it got out of control,
right.
And I think you have to have some way to look at it so that you're not incurring long-term liabilities that you weren't aware of.
Right. Okay. It's kind of out of your bailiwick. I'm just curious.
Nothing's out of our bailiwick.
I'm just curious what you think of the movie tax
credit. I think the movie tax credit's been positive.
Well,
Yeah. I mean, I think.
It's created 2 jobs.
No.
It's created Feinberg's job and I always forget her name, the casting.
No. You know what? Before let me make a suggestion to you.
Yeah.
Call Joe Barrows at the Teamsters Union. Okay? And call Mike Arugio from the Stagehands Union. And I'll give you a couple of other, IBW. They have done a terrible job, in my opinion, of documenting the impact of that. And we've looked at the office of the film industry.
Okay.
Yeah, just give Joe back, because by the way, he logs it. He can give you the number of hours every year of the film tax credit where his guys have worked in Rhode Island on film projects and the amount of payroll. Okay. And it's more than people would think, and somehow it doesn't. it doesn't get captured.
Joe,
So
what's his name?
Joe Barrows, Bairos.
Bairos?
Yeah, at the Teamsters, 434-0454. I'm old fashioned.
Ah,
434-0544.
434-0454.
Okay.
Teamsters 251 in East Providence. Their guys are the ones primarily in the film industry. And one of the reasons that they came to Rhode Island, because they were having a lot of problems in both Boston and New York, and Rhode Island is very workforce friendly for them.
And who was the other guy? Joe?
Mike Arugio
Mike Arugio.
from the Stagehands Union. They do quite a bit of work in that when they have the films.
Okay.
And you know what? The other thing is,
that's got a sunset clause right now, I believe.
you know, is it?
I think it's, but I can't remember the exact year, but I think it's due to expire 2014, maybe? I can't remember the exact year, but I believe it is due to disappear. But you guys, I take it, would be in favor of continuing?
Yes. And we also, I think another priority that we'll be working on is the nursing school, the public-private partnership with the nursing school. Yes. Boy, I got to tell you, I even did some notes.
So I got to ask you to define. What do you mean by working on? So you mean lobbying to get?
Yeah.
And
or being once, we've actually continued to have dialogue with both the administration and with Dr. Dooley and others.
What about Cariulo and Rick?
Fully in favor of it.
Mm-hmm.
She's fully in favor of it.
Has made that statement publicly in front of us on numerous occasions.
And the most prestigious Rick graduate, Gordon Fox, is he fully in favor of it?
I don't know. I don't know that. I don't know the answer to that. I think what happened last year is they were not able to come up with a specific enough proposal that both the chairs of the House and the Finance Committee couldn't really get their arms around it. Because what you really have to do, as I understand it, is you have to have a little bit clearer idea where you're going to put it. You have to see the size of it. And then, because you're going to have to alter the state law to develop a long-term lease agreement so that the revenue stream to pay for the private development is going to be the rent from the nursing school.
Right.
Which, if you had done a bond issue, the rent would be the equivalent of what the bond payment would be. So you really, technically, if you make a decision politically or strategically to have a nursing school, there's two ways to do it. One is you can float a bond,
Right.
and then you have a state of Rhode Island is required to pay back the bonds.
Right.
You take that same amount of money, let's $10,000 a month, and instead of giving it back to the bondholders, now you're going to give it to a developer, and that's going to be a lease payment.
Right.
For a period of time, and you need to
Right.
get the lease. I think the General Assembly has to take action if the lease is longer than a certain period of time.
Okay.
Now, the two advantages to doing it that way, one is time,
You're talking about the leasing. Right?
yeah, the speed, and the other is size. Because,
You're talking about monetary size?
no, size of the building.
Okay.
So what you can do, let's say you want to build a nursing school, it's going to be 4 stories.
Great.
The developer says, wait a minute, I can build an 8-story building because I have a guaranteed rental payment that's going to be enough to get me covered.
They become your anchor tenant.
Your anchor tenant.
And you can do
And
whatever you
now
want to.
I can do the rest of it.
And your anchor tenant is URI?
Is
URI and Rick.
is
It's a joint-
it's a
it's a
nursing
joint
school,
nursing
correct?
school.
Okay,
And so what you have to do is you have to structure it in such a way that if you were going to pay the bonds back, let's say you're going to pay the bonds back at $10,000 a year, you don't want to be paying back the lease. You don't want to be making a lease at $20,000 a year.
Right.
But ideally, the bonds, you're paying a lot of interest on the bonds. Here, you're just paying, the rental income. So.
Right. So the deal, that arrangement mirrors in some respects what's happening in Providence Place Mall.
Correct, exactly, same thing. And basically what Well, it's different than the Weston. When the Weston was sold,
Right.
the deal was, you have to buy the building, you have to do 200 more rooms, but you can also build condos.
Right.
Yeah, right. So the state, if you think about it, the state really benefited from that.
Yes.
Over and above, because even though the condo sales were not part of the deal, the state of Rhode Island and the city of Providence then got money out of the sale of the condos.
Right.
Because it allowed for a bigger project.
Right.
And this would be the same thing here. And again, the other advantage, obviously, to the city of Providence in this deal is that the property would be taxed.
Oh, I see.
And so you would put that building on the Providence city tax rolls. So, and I think this is a little bit of where we should start thinking about going as a state, kind of like what Rahm Emanuel has been doing in Chicago. That whole thing, $1 billion thing where you get private equity to come in, and then you can then build the infrastructure, and you instead of paying.
Getting back to something that Paul had mentioned earlier, could that be a project for the AFL-CIO? Could you be the
Well, the AFL-CIO is involved in the project in Chicago.
Well, what about here?
what about here?
Well,
Once again.
that would be something we'd be very interested in.
So I'm going to turn this question around to the other side. What it seems like all the forces are aligned, all the planets are aligned for this one. What stumbling blocks? What could scuttle an agreement? I don't want to call it a deal. The legislation or the contract necessary to get that project started.
Well, I think I think what the administration did initially is they put out I get these RFI,
Right.
requests for information.
Correct.
I think they have now subsequently put out a request for proposal. So I think what you have to do, what has to be done is you have to see who's interested and see the credibility of the people and make sure that they're reputable.
Have they already done that? Have they put out a request
I
for
think
proposal?
they did put out an RFI, and they did get 3 or 4 companies that came back and said that we would be interested in doing it. I don't know the time frame. I should know this, but I think either they have or they are close to putting out a request for proposal. Mm-hmm. Once you get that, then you start negotiating with these people, and then you start to deal with the 2 critical issues, which is the size of the project and where exactly is it going to be,
and which academic gets the corner office.
and who gets the corner office. But we have been, I have been in her presence on several occasions where she has unequivocally committed to this project.
Okay.
So I don't think that's a stumbling block at all.
A question here, we made our list here. Where do you guys stand on the Chafee administration's attempt to change the state's sales taxes? The original effort, I think, was to lower the tax but broaden the base. Where did you guys stand on that? Did you look at them one by one? Do you have a feeling about the entire idea?
Well,
it seemed to me that's been shot down pretty good.
Yeah, I think we never officially opposed. We never supported it. We'll put it that way. I think that there has been a general feeling that if you could expand the sales tax to some of the services that are, as our economy has changed, it may make some sense, but that it might make more sense if it were also reduced. So you really have to look at the 2 things in concert with each other. But I think that, generally speaking, the sales tax is more regressive than an income tax. So that we had put more of our efforts into our tax equity initiative than on the sales tax thing. I don't know what his plans are going forward, but I don't think they'll.
He's talking about trying it again, at least to some. He's a stubborn guy in certain ways.
Good. I think that last year they made some, limit. They made some more changes.
The problem, as I see it, is that it's very spotty, and that you'll have some interest groups with power,
Correct.
and they will be able to knock it down. And you might have some other interest group that doesn't have that level of power or money or just slow on the uptake. And suddenly you're taxing tour buses.
Yeah, well, i.e. the dog groomers
dog groomers.
versus the car washers.
Exactly.
The first time I realized we had so many dog groomers when I went up to the state meeting, and then like 100 of them showed up.
No, so
where did you guys all come from?
I mean, and you know what? It's pretty emotional.
Oh yeah.
I mean, and it's a dog owner. It's a shop. Maybe they employ 3 or 4 or 5 people, but each one of those things has a radius or has an interest of probably about 200 families.
Right.
So they gin them up.
Right.
And then you have the car washes. Who knew we had so many car washes?
Right.
But so I think that's why it's difficult to do it in that way, because you're right. You're making sort of like arbitrary, in some cases, or more like who has power and who doesn't.
First of all, Chafee makes some arbitrary choices, and then the General Assembly makes arbitrary choices.
Right.
So you've got sort of a double level of
Right.
of choice there. So you have a weird patchwork quilt.
Right.
Of some people are paying a sales tax, some people aren't. Some people's sales tax go up, some people go down. Yeah, I think you need consistency across the board if you're going to do it.
Well, I mean, I think if we were to start all over again today, you'd probably say let's tax everything at 4% or 3% or 5%, and maybe leave food out. I mean, maybe you leave food out, because I think that's. Or maybe you could tax some other.
Because that's probably the most regressive thing you could do, because people have to eat.
Right. Yeah. I mean, it's funny because we don't leave food out completely, because you do pay a tax on prepared foods that you buy at the supermarket, and you do pay tax on soda.
Right.
And
the sales tax on soda.
And restaurant meals.
Oh yeah, no, and the meal, yeah. So but again, I guess it's theoretically, there was a time when people didn't eat out, and eating out was seen as a luxury.
Right.
Yeah, now it's not. I don't think you put it in that category anymore.
Right. For a lot of people, I'm good.
Let me see if there was anything. One thing we had.
I'll tell you a thing that I went to yesterday. That
You did good job.
no, I was. This is the most encouraging event I went to in a long time, and there was no coverage of it.
What was that?
It was a forum that Senator Whitehouse put together on the ports and maritime development at CCRI yesterday morning from 9 to 11. It was.
He didn't have a crane to show off.
Well, that's the whole problem. It was historic. For the people who have been talking about the port and maritime development, and this is something that I think that, we've been involved in this for a long time. In fact, one of the issues that we talk to candidates about is support of essentially a maritime development authority to coordinate the activities of all the ports in Rhode Island. And this meeting was at CCRI. It included all 4 members of the congressional delegation and the governor. It was moderated by Lori White from the chamber. It had probably every single key person who's involved in maritime development there, from a business perspective. The head of MARAD for the region had presentations by the.
This was at CCRI?
CCRI, yeah. Had presentations by both the Port of Providence, what's his name? Guy that runs the Port of Providence, and also Steve King from QDC, about what's happening, what are the ways of collaboration, what are the competitions, what's happening with the short sea shipping. The dredging of Quonset, which is going on, which was done through the NDDC. So, but for some of us who have been following this for a long, long time, I've never seen that many. There was an energy level there, which didn't exist. Bill Walaska was there, who's been chairing that port commission, the legislative port commission, with Peter Kilmartin, but now with Deborah Girio. So it was encouraging. There's a lot of positive things happening, down the road.
I suspect that if you would, sort of go back in time and someone today were proposing a container port at Quonset, when you have unemployment,
Oh, it would be like gambling, like the gambling this time. It would pass.
it would pass.
Yeah.
It would pass no problem. If,
Yeah.
You know, and again, again, looking ahead, but some of the stuff you learn, I mean, we're gonna, if this global warming continues, the Arctic is going to be opening up.
Right.
The
Yeah.
Northeast.
Yeah.
And we will be the
Northwest
second
Passage.
closest port to that area of the world after Halifax.
And not Boston?
Well, Boston has a lot of problems, you know, because of the tunnels and stuff like that. But for the deep water,
It also has a 12-foot sea change. And
Yeah.
having worked on Union Wharf and watched,
Yeah.
where the hell the water go? There's dirt here.
yeah. But anyway, that was pretty encouraging. That was just you know.
One thing that was on our list, and it concerned job development. You talked about a lot of different programs that the union is involved with for job force training, and maybe decentralizing them is a better way to do it because you get it to people's work, you know. But is there any idea of setting up some sort of academy, setting up a central job force, workforce training place where people would go?
Well, actually, I'll tell you what some of the most successful job training that goes on is one of the things that the Job Development Fund funds is called incumbent worker training, where these grants go to the
Right,
companies.
so that's done like that.
And that actually is, I think, been seen by people who have looked at it is to be the best way of doing it for two reasons. One is you're doing the training right at that company's workplace, and it's specific to their needs. And they're deciding what they need, what this training needs to be done. And they don't have to leave the workplace to do it. But secondly, there's a match. So when we're putting $2 million into incumbent worker training, that's matched by another $2 million by the employer.
Right.
So you're really getting a double amount of training going on, and they're determining like whether or not you know these 10 operators need to become more familiar with computers.
Right. So it addresses the need, but in a decentralized fashion.
In a decentralized fashion, specific to them. I mean, the apprenticeship programs, the people do for their, you know, that model is probably historically it's been around for the longest, and it's worked where you come to one place to get your academic requirements in one centralized place, but then you're out on the job. You're learning with a journeyman. You know, you're
Right.
doing hands-on,
Right.
you know, training like that. So I think what we've done with the Job Training Fund by trying to emphasize more money going to the incumbent worker training and the industry partnerships that have come about, then you know you have the employer community who are setting the standards. They know that this thing works. That this is what they want to do, and it meets their needs.
Okay.
Almost.
I'm pretty good. I don't think I have anything else.